Before beginning this documentary, I wish to acknowledge my sincerest gratitude to Co.ag for creating the most amazing background music for this documentary. Link to this channel is in the description below. Definitely go and check it out. Pablo Emilio Escobar Gaviria was born on December 1st of 1949 into a lower middle class family. Young Pablo grew up in the Median suburb of Envigado. As a young man, he was driven and ambitious, telling his friends and family that he wanted to be the president of Colombia someday. He got his start as a street criminal, and according to legend, he would steal tombstones, sandblast the names off of them, and resell them to crooked Panamanians. Later, he moved up to stealing cars. It was in the 1970s that he found his path to wealth and power, which was drugs. He would buy cocoa paste in Bolivia and Peru, refine it, and transport it for sale in the United States. Pablo Escobar first became involved in the illegal drugs trade in the late 1970s. In this period, cocaine was rapidly becoming fashionable in the United States, leading to an exponential increase in demand for the drug. However, as the cocaine trade was still comparatively new and had yet to cause much violence in the United States, combating the smugglers was still not a high priority task for the country's law enforcement. The combination of skyrocketing demand for cocaine in the context of limited risks of shipment seizures for drugs barons meant that the trade quickly became a highly lucrative one. Spying an opportunity to make substantial sums from cocaine exports, Escobar allied with a few other criminal associates to form the Medellin cartel. The group rapidly gained control of the entire distribution chain for cocaine, smuggling tons of the drug each week to the United States and other international destinations. At its height, the cartel was estimated to be supplying as much as 90% of the cocaine entering the United States and to be earning around $60 million a day. Much of the revenue went on paying bribes to politicians, journalists, and a host of law enforcement and military officials. However, the group also spent heavily on acquiring all the trappings you would associate with international drug dealers, which was luxury goods, helicopters, houses, expensive cars, and a succession of ladies. Escobar, a ruthlessly ambitious man with aspirations of holding public office, also began to spend a proportion of his income on populist initiatives, financing a series of public works in the poorer neighborhoods of Medellin and Envigado. These included 50 football pitches, housing for low-income families, hospitals and schools. Such works won him the support of many of the city's less affluent groups, many of whom still admire him today as a Colombian Robin Hood. Much of this expenditure was concentrated around the time of Escobar's campaign for a seat in Colombia's lower house of Congress, which he obtained in 1982. The move ultimately proved to be a strategic error in that it brought the formerly little-known Escobar into the public spotlight and encouraged journalists from Colombian newspaper El Espectador to investigate the source of his wealth. After the press exposed Escobar's links to the drugs trade, the political establishment was forced into action. The cause was taken up by then Justice Minister Rodrigo Lara Bonilla, who publicly denounced Escobar's criminal background in Colombia's Congress. An investigation into Escobar began, which eventually culminated in the drugs baron having his congressional seat revoked. The US also began to stand up and take notice of Escobar at this stage, opting to withdraw the visa it had previously granted to him. Just because of one small error, Escobar's dreams of political office and of public respectability had been fundamentally undermined. In revenge for his expulsion from Congress in 1984, Escobar ordered the assassination of Justice Minister Lara, which was carried out by the cartel's hitman in April. The murder of Lara prompted the Colombian state into its first serious backlash against the Medellin cartel, with President Belaroso Bentacor ordering police to capture the group's leading members. Escobar and his associates responded by placing and detonating a number of car bombs in the capital and Medellin, and by carrying out further assassinations of prominent public officials. One of the most dramatic attacks of this period in which Escobar was believed to be involved was an attack by the M19 insurgent group on the Palace of Justice in central Bogota. Escobar was alleged to have funded the operation, which all but destroyed the building and led to the deaths of numerous government workers, in a cynical attempt to destroy files in the Medellin cartel held by the Colombian law enforcement. Betancourt's decision to sign new extradition legislation also saw retaliation by Escobar in the form of the kidnappings of several senior judicial and political figures, including Andres Pastrana, who later became Colombia's president. A new effort by the cartel to negotiate their surrender in exchange for a government commitment that they would not be extradited had failed by the late 1980s. America's war on drugs had escalated during this decade, meaning that Colombia's senior officials could no longer reach a negotiated deal with the cartel without risking their ire of its ally to the north. With the end of a dialogue between the Colombian state and Escobar came a new round of cartel violence against senior police, judicial, and political officials. This culminated in the assassination of the popular presidential candidate Luis Carlos Galán in 1989. Galán was leader of the Liberal Party and had long held a principled stance against drug trafficking organizations. He was much loved in the country and was widely tipped to be Colombia's next president. His murder outraged Colombian society, turned new sections of the population against the drugs barons, and led authorities to redouble their efforts to capture cartel leaders. The government responded to the murder by forming a new elite force with the sole purpose of tracking down, capturing, or killing Escobar and his associates. The US provided extensive new financial and military assistance to support the initiative. This was the beginning of an outright war between the state and the cartel, which would last until 1991. Escobar's attacks in this period dramatically escalated and became much more indiscriminate. In the space of less than 3 months in late 1989, there were over 100 bomb attacks in government buildings and public spaces in all of Colombia's major cities. 2 such incidents were particularly horrifying. In an effort to kill presidential candidate Cesar Gaviria, Galán's successor, Escobar's henchmen detonated a bomb on an airplane in which they believed he was traveling. The attack left 107 civilians dead. Just over a week later, the group placed a powerful bomb outside the offices of the Domestic Security and Intelligence Agency DOS, in an effort to kill its director, Miguel Alfredo Maza Marcos. 63 people died and 500 were injured in the attack, though Maza Marquez survived. Executions of public officials and numerous terrorist attacks continued, with the expectations of brief, periodic truces as the government tried to negotiate Escobar's surrender. During this period, the cartel leader first offered the infamous reward money of up to $2,000 for each policeman killed by any member of the population. One of the largest stumbling blocks to the surrender of leading members of the Medellin cartel in the 1980s was the issue of extradition. The strength of their objections to extradition was summarized in the following slogan, which the cartel coined: "Better a tomb in Colombia than a jail cell in the United States." By 1990, the government had grown weary of the continued violence of the drug groups and thus conceded to their demands not to be extradited. That year, the government of Cesar Gaviria offered a reduced prison sentence to be served in Colombia for those cartel bosses which handed themselves in voluntarily. Some of Escobar's closest associates began to take advantage of this offer from late 1990, generally with the blessing of the cartel leader. Escobar himself continued to pressure the government for a better deal, making particular use of selective kidnappings of political officials and their relatives to achieve this goal. The tactic ultimately proved successful, as authorities ultimately agreed that Escobar would serve a dramatically reduced prison term at a facility located in his hometown, which was designed and built by Escobar himself. In June 1991, the drugs boss entered his new prison known as La Catedral. While parts of La Catedral were initially decorated to look like a fairly conventional detention facility, it gradually became clear that it was far from it. The drugs boss was housed along with all of his closest criminal associates, and these individuals rapidly took advantage of the situation to secure themselves significantly better conditions than those normally available to prisoners. All of the prisoner guards at La Catedral were on Escobar's payroll, allowing him to take extreme liberties with his imprisonment. Cartel members rapidly filled the building with luxury goods such as widescreen TVs, jacuzzis, pool tables, and bars. Guards also allowed him to receive unlimited visitors and even on occasion to leave the prison to enjoy himself on the outside. More than a prison, La Catedral came to resemble a holiday camp for the partying narcos that were detained there. Housing Escobar together with his criminal associates and allowing him to receive frequent visitors also enabled the cartel boss to carry on running his drugs empire from his prison. While it was now up to Escobar's associates on the outside to manage the day-to-day activities of the drugs trade, there was no doubt who was in charge. The new bosses of the cocaine business still essentially took orders from Escobar and had to pay him huge monthly sums in tribute. However, as time went on, Escobar became increasingly paranoid about his allies on the outside, fearing that they were conspiring against him to steal profits from drug sales. In a radical move in mid-1992, Escobar called two of his most long-standing lieutenants into La Catedral and had them killed. News of the murders spread quickly, bringing with it greater political and media attention on the capo's lax prison conditions at La Catedral. As details of the repeated and wholesale breaches of Escobar's surrender agreement emerged, the government decided it needed to take action. In July of 1992, the head of Colombia's prison service traveled together with then Vice Justice Minister Medellin to inform Escobar that he and his associates were to be transferred to another facility. However, Escobar feared that this supposed transfer was just a first step on the way to his extradition to the United States and thus refused to comply. Instead, he held the two officials captive inside the prison and sought to use the detainees as a bargaining chip with the government. President Gaviria's response was to mount a military operation to storm La Catedral, free the hostages, and end Escobar's reign of terror. The operation was bungled, however, and in the ensuing confusion, the head of the cartel managed to escape. Once on the outside, Escobar tried to resume his war with the state, but the situation was now much more changed. The murder of two such close associates at La Catedral had driven a wedge between Escobar and other cartel members, who feared they would become the next target of his violent paranoia. Former allies of Escobar now split from him and instead formed a tactical alliance with parts of the Cali cartel and paramilitary leaders to track down this high-profile fugitive. Together they formed a loose organization known as Los PEPES, short for those prosecuted by Pablo Escobar, which unleashed a barrage of violent attacks on the drug traffickers' associates and properties. At the same time, the Colombian state formed the Bloc de Búsqueda, or Search Group, an elite squad of US-supported officials whose sole purpose was to track Escobar down. By making use of his extensive network of criminal contacts and safe houses located throughout Medellin and Envigado, Escobar was able to evade capture for more than a year. During this time, Escobar increasingly cut a solitary figure as a number of close allies were lost, either killed or captured by authorities and Los PEPES. As his criminal empire disintegrated, so too did the grip he held over Colombia's political and security establishment. With the tables turning, public officials felt more confident about rejecting Escobar's demands without fear of retribution. Isolated from much of his money, from his family and his power, Escobar became reduced to hiding out in low-key properties in Medellin. With the search group constantly seeking to monitor all of his electronic communications, The fleeing cartel leader was barely able to communicate with the outside world. On the 1st of December of 1993, Escobar ignored the risks and made a series of phone calls to his family. The search group intercepted the call, tracked down his location to a hideout in Medellin, and deployed a unit to go and storm the house. Escobar was still on the phone to his family as the police arrived. His last known words to his son were, "I've gotta go now. Something strange is going on here." As authorities entered the house, Escobar grabbed a weapon and scrambled up onto the rooftop of the house in an effort to flee. There, he was shot in the heart and died, and so ended the life of Colombia's most dangerous criminal. Maria Victoria Henao Vallejo met Pablo Escobar when she was only 13 years old. Back then, Escobar was 24 years old. They started dating immediately, even though her family did not approve of the relationship. They were married 2 years later in 1976. Though Escobar is known for his extravagant affairs and countless mistresses, Maria never abandoned him. Exiled in Argentina, Maria Victoria Henao Vallejo changed her name to Maria Isabel Santos Caballero. She and her 2 children lived a quiet middle-class life in a Buenos Aires apartment equipped with various housekeepers. In 1999, 5 years into their life, word got out in Argentina of who they really were. In 2000, Maria Victoria and her son were arrested on money laundering charges. Escobar's widow was allegedly receiving illegally earned money from Colombian drug lords in Uruguay. Vallejo was held in an Argentine jail for 15 months along with her son, until authorities released them based on insufficient evidence. Pablo Escobar's son not only inherited his last name, but also his first name, and also his facial features. Such a dangerous combination when trying to start over with a new identity. In exile, he became known as Juan Sebastian Marroquin Santos. Juan Sebastian has always been a pacifist. He loved his father, but he never agreed with the violence he stirred up in Colombia. Born in 1977, Juan understood what his father was doing in the cocaine trade of the 1980s and early 1990s. Although the two were very close, Escobar's son disapproved of his father's actions while the drug lord was alive. Relocating to Argentina in his late teens, Juan Sebastian entered school to become an architect. He enjoyed his new quiet life free of surrounding gunfire and fear, but he never felt quite comfortable living a lie. None of his friends or colleagues knew who he really was. While that was a relief to some extent, he also felt guilty. In 2009, Escobar's son released a documentary called Sins of My Father, along with the help of his mom and 2 victims of his father's terror. In this work, Juan finally revealed all his secrets. He reached out to his father's victims, the Colombian people, and to the world to apologize for his father's actions. Instead of fueling the cycle of revenge and murder, Pablo Escobar's pacifist son is seeking dialogue, forgiveness, and reconciliation. Manuela, Pablo Escobar's daughter, has remained a more mysterious figure than her brother and mom. While the other 2 have conceded interviews and produced a documentary, Manuela, on the other hand, has shied from the public eye. More was known about her as a little girl before her father's death than is known today. Born in 1984, Manuela's life with her father was cut short. Escobar's acquaintances recall Manuela as her father's spoiled little princess. When Escobar's daughter wanted a unicorn, for example, he bought her a horse and stapled a cone to its head and wings to its back. When Manuela asked her father how much $1 billion was, he responded, "The value of your eyes, my princess." Escobar even forced one of his mistresses to get an abortion when she became pregnant, because a drug lord had promised his daughter that she would be the last of his line. Always on the run, Manuela was accustomed to a life of instability and danger. In Argentina, she changed her name to Juana Manuela Marroquin Santos. At just 10 years old, she had to uproot her entire life and pretend to be someone else. She went to school and started a new life in Buenos Aires. Everything came crashing down a mere 5 years later, just like it had in December of 1993. Now everyone knew who she was, and she was stripped yet again of the existence she had known. Not much information about Manuela has been recorded since. Now, as a 33-year-old, she lives away from the spotlight, and it seems that she will keep it that way. So that's it for this documentary. I really hope you enjoyed it. If you did, make sure to leave a like. Until the next video, goodbye.